So, hi everyone, welcome to the first Sustainability Seminar Series event of the academic year. It is great to see so many of you join us today to talk about this very important topic. I will keep my introduction short because we are joined by three amazing, incredible speakers, and I want to maximize the time that you have to hear from them and to ask any questions. But just to start with some ground rules, which are important to just run through, please keep your mics off when you're not speaking. And if you would like to ask a question, please type it in the chat or wait until the Q&A that we will have at the end to raise your hand. And also please note that we are recording this session. So if you're not comfortable with that, please switch off your cameras. So to talk a bit more about the context of this seminar and where it's coming from, so this event is part of an open access interdisciplinary seminar series that aims to engage all of you and beyond with some of the biggest topics in the sustainability space. So the series invites seminal professional speakers to discuss subjects such as climate science, climate justice, as we'll be hearing today, sustainable agriculture, and much more. So do stay tuned for more interesting seminars to come up throughout the year. This seminar series is also linked to the Key Sustainability and Climate module. So this is a fully co-created open access and interdisciplinary module that anyone at King's can take, and it covers the biggest topics in sustainability, from climate change and food to sustainable finance and social justice. So if you haven't enrolled yet, and if you're part of King's, then we would encourage you to check it out, and we'll also share the link for this in the chat. But then to focus on today, what you're all here for, we're really excited that our first seminar is focused on climate justice, shining a light on various interesting and personal perspectives. Climate justice means finding solutions to the climate crisis that not only reduce emissions or protect the natural world, but that do so in a way which creates a fairer, more just and more equal world in the process. As injustice is a root cause of the climate crisis, fighting for justice must be at the heart of the solutions. So we have three fantastic speakers joining us today. Hur Alamin from Climate Outreach, Dr. Shannon Shah, Director of Faith for the Climate. So each speaker will present for about 50 minutes and we'll have about 30 minutes at the end for Q&A and a discussion. We're starting today hearing from an incredible speaker that we have. That's Hur Alamin. So Hur is an expert communicator, researcher, and advocate. For the last year, she has been leading climate outreach's work, helping communicators talk about climate justice in a way that inspires and gives hope to young people. And Climate Outreach are leading experts in climate change communications, aiming to ensure impacts are understood, accepted, and acted upon across society. So we're really delighted to have you join us, and over to you, Hur.
So thank you for having me with you today. Today I will be talking a little bit about our research on how to communicate climate justice with young adults in Europe. I will share with you some of our findings and our recommendations. In my presentation, I will tell you a little bit about us as Climate Outreach, what we do. I will then describe our research a little bit and then dive a little deeper into what a climate justice analysis means before moving on to sharing some of our key findings and recommendations. And then at the very end, I will briefly reflect on our research process so far and outline some important next steps. So we at Climate Outreach conduct climate communications research. So we are really interested in conducting research on how to communicate climate change to diverse audiences. And that is to ensure that impacts are understood, accepted, and acted upon in society. So more recently, we've partnered up with 14 organizations across 20 European countries in the Spark Consortium, which is funded by the EU. And in collaboration with these organizations, we conducted a 2-year-long audience research exploring climate justice with young adults in Europe. And based on that research, based on our findings, we conducted analysis and distilled that into a messaging guide that helps us really figure out what communication tactics work and what don't really work very much. Both of these pieces can be found on our website. I can also link them in the chat right after my presentation. So in our research, which was done in partnership with a Spark consortium, consisted of two main methodologies for data collection. So we did an online survey of about 6,000 young adults in Europe. They were aged between 18 and 36 across 6 European countries. And the sample was quite random, so they are broadly representative of young adults in that region. We also did 20 workshops. We call them narrative workshops, but you can think of them as focus group discussions in 9 European countries with young adults who are concerned about climate change, but are not engaged in action. So whether they don't know what to do or whether they are not yet convinced, but they are more or less inactive on climate change. And they tended to position themselves in the center or a little bit skewed to the left politically. So from our perspective, what we think that at the core of a climate justice analysis is that those who are most effective are the least responsible for causing climate change. So we see that the most affected communities have had very little to contribute to climate change. A climate justice analysis also recognizes history of colonialism, extractive economies, and exploitation all around the world. It also unpacks systemic roots of the crisis. So it doesn't just consider current situations, but it also goes back through history and looks at how it systematically affects people. And it locates responsibility with polluters primarily. And lastly, a climate justice analysis suggests shifts in how power and resources are distributed. So this is just for you to have like a background about what we mean when we say climate justice. So I'll move on a little bit to tell you about our key findings. So when we did our survey with these 6,000 young adults, we collected our data, we analyzed it, and I'm sharing with you now our key findings from the survey. Only 28% of our respondents thought that they could explain the term climate justice. When they proceeded to explain the term, unfortunately, it was often not correct. 45%, and this is quite shocking, 45% do not agree that the least responsible are suffering the worst impacts. This really asks of us to pause a little bit and really understand what can we do to really bring that awareness. We'll talk about that in a little bit. On the brighter side, however, 81% of our respondents agreed that we need to transform our society and our economy in order to tackle climate change. And this is quite a big statement that we will also unpack a little bit further in the next slides. And 58% of our respondents supported the idea that wealthy countries should pay compensation for damages, say a loss and damage fund. And this ties in a little bit with the polluter pays principle, which we found a lot of support for as well. From our narrative workshops or the focus group discussions, and here the audience is slightly different, so I'd like to remind you of that. In the workshops, we had young adults who are concerned about climate change but are not acting on that yet. What we found in those workshops is that these concerned young adults agree that climate change is a systemic problem, but they struggle to make connections with social justice issues. So, for example, it is difficult for them to visualize or understand how, for example, climate change is related to gender justice. They cannot see how, for example, vulnerable communities are more impacted by climate change. They do want to work together and look forward to the future rather than look towards the past. So they want to move on. They want the world to take action to move us forward rather than divide us and set us back. They feel powerless to act, unfortunately, and they are often unable to envision solutions. So that is a very key insight. And they also do not have enough trust in their governments. They do not believe that their governments will do the right thing. And also, they struggle to envision the reality of loss and damage mechanisms. So when the idea of a loss and damage fund was proposed, they really struggled. They asked so many questions about how is that going to happen in reality, how will that operate, How will the money get to the right people? What will the money be used for? Things like that. These are very valid questions and concerns that we need to find a way to answer together. So I will talk a little bit about our recommendations. So from all of these pieces of information and results that we got from our research, and of course there are many other points, but I just listed our key findings here. We did another round of analysis where we tested narratives and we saw what resonates well with these audience when we're talking to them and what doesn't resonate as well. And we put them all in a messaging guide. And I'm also sharing with you our key recommendations on how to communicate climate justice with young adults in Europe. So our first key advice is to build awareness and understanding. So because we saw that young people are not very familiar with the term, we do recommend that you start a conversation on climate justice by explaining what it means and explaining related terms. So for example, similar to net zero, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Many people don't know what it means, and sometimes it puts them off in the climate debate. Climate justice, the term climate justice falls in a similar category. So we do encourage you to explain the term before digging deeper into the details of climate justice. We do encourage as well the building of awareness of key principles, and that is how has the past led to the present. So you could use real life examples to do that. Say, for example, palm oil, palm tree plantations, how deforestation has been happening, has happened and is still happening in Southeast Asia. Forests are being cut down in order to build these palm tree plantations to extract palm oil for industries. That's quite impactful on local communities, indigenous communities. People are losing their lands. There's environmental degradation. And then you can also build awareness of the principle about how climate change makes inequalities worse. And with this one, you can bring it home a little bit and think about how, for example, in the 2003 heat wave in Europe, more women than men died. And this could be due to lack of or due to the disparity in economic situation, for example. We also encourage you to discuss contradictions and difficulties openly. So in these discussions around social justice and climate change, there are many, many contradictions and often many difficulties. And we don't say that, oh, well, we can find the answer to all the questions, but it is important to at least have discussions and address those concerns. And lastly, we encourage everyone to use personal and relatable stories as evidence. So, for example, Al Hassan earlier has told us his own personal story with climate change and climate justice, and I think that was very impactful, and that really leaves a mark on everyone who's listening to that story. The next bit of advice that we suggest is to bring people together. We are at a time in our world where there's a lot of division, and young people are tired of that division and they really want to see more unity. And to do that, we suggest that you draw on their desire for a more equal world. Young people are very empathetic. They have a strong sense of solidarity, equality, and care, and we've seen those values come across in their answers in the workshops and in the survey. So we do urge you to draw on those principles, to bring people together, to use positive and encouraging language when speaking about climate justice, and really avoid a blame game and a game of division. So we encourage having constructive conversations rather than divisive ones. And our last recommendation is to show visions and solutions. And what we mean by show visions and solutions is to first emphasize that it's not too late to act. So we don't want to undermine the urgency of the climate crisis, but at the same time, young people don't respond very well to fear mongering, quote unquote. So it's not. We don't want to make it seem like it's too late. We cannot do anything. There's still hope for us. There's still time for us to act. And that we are able to bring action. Another very important point here is to focus on change and collective action. So young people don't want to feel the burden of tackling the climate crisis on their own. At the end of the day, this is a crisis that they've inherited, they did not cause, or that they've contributed little to causing. So it is definitely a collective effort. But we also need to focus that change is possible, and societies across the world, societies. Thank you. And we've seen societies across the world really come together in different occasions to transform their societies and to affect change. We've seen that in the civil rights movement, we've seen that in the women's suffrage movement. So transformational change is possible. It just requires a lot of collective effort, and we do have the capacity for that effort. And lastly, we urge you to think the possibilities for action. So ask ourselves, what does it mean to, what does action mean? What action is useful? What isn't so useful? And a good question to take away and think about is, what does a good life look like? This is a very important question that really can be a very good starting point when thinking about where are we heading in our future. I will now give you a little bit of a reflection and some next steps. So it's been about 2 years since we've conducted this research, and our messaging guide came out just in July, a few months ago. And more recently, so that would be a few weeks ago, I joined about 100 young activists from around the world, and these are climate activists, on a journey from Paris to Barcelona. And in Barcelona, we ran a workshop and we were talking about climate justice and sharing our stories and experiences with climate justice and how we've encountered it differently around the world. And we put our advice to the test, and we gave our advice to these activists who are also communicators because they have their online audiences and followers. And it was a very open-minded discussion, very inspiring, very engaging. And when I came back and I reflected with the team about our research and where we are now and what is our next step, we decided that in order for climate justice to be effective, we need to have a balanced conversation. And so we need to include voices from both the global north and the global south. So we've done our research, and our research focuses primarily on young adults in the global north, and that is great. But what is now needed is to include voices from the global south and listen to what they have to say about climate justice and see what they understand about it. So this is definitely a gap in the research that needs to be filled. Another bit of advice that we, or reflection that we came to, is that we need to empower young adults and include them in climate justice conversations. And Kings is a great place to do that. There's a lot of capacity, there's so much room for imagination, there's so much room for discussions and conversations that can really improve our world and really help us build a future that we all want to be a part of. So with that, I think I will leave you a little bit to think about what I just said, and perhaps I'll be very happy to answer your questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hur, for another incredible presentation. I came across this messaging guide when it came out, and I think it's so important, so useful, and I think it's really insightful and really shows what we could think about how we can communicate, especially anyone who is in the communication space. Really important. So thanks for also going through those recommendations. And there are, some interesting as well, the stats that I would love to ask some questions about later on to dive more into it. But first, let's move on to our third and final speaker. So we've got Dr. Shannon Shah with us today. He's the director of Faith for the Climate. He has balanced careers in human rights advocacy, journalism, and theater and music in his native Malaysia before relocating to London in 2010. He holds a doctorate in the sociology of religion from King's and conducts research for the information network focused on religious movements, Inform, which is an independent educational charity based at King's. So thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Yone. Thank you for this invitation. So today, I'll round off by talking to you about the relationship between the words faith and climate in the organization that I lead, which is called Faith for the Climate. So I'll be focusing on the interpretive and tangible aspects of faith and climate, and how these affect the ways that we approach climate justice, which Jorge has talked about, but how we do this specifically as faith groups within the Faith for the Climate Network. And I'll end with some examples of the kind of work we do. So the first thing I often tell people about Faith for the Climate is that it does what it says on the tin, right? So I'll read the description from our website. Faith for the Climate exists to encourage, inspire, and equip faith communities in their work on climate change. Climate change is the biggest and most urgent challenge facing humanity, and people of faith see our planet as a gift and believe we have a sacred responsibility to care for and protect the Earth's climate for future generations. Many of our faiths and belief systems also share a golden rule: treat others as you wish to be treated. Faith communities have a unique and precious role to play in our thought, speech, worship, and action, alongside and in partnership with secular environmental organizations, enabling people of faith to live out their calling by acting to protect the climate. So that's how we describe ourselves. And I will actually readily admit that this kind of practical, everyday description of who we are and our work does not actually capture the complex ways that religion or faith contain many, many different interpretive dimensions about what it means to be human and how we engage with the world around us. Besides, how do we even define what religion is? How do we define faith? Does religion require, for example, a belief in God or a higher power or guidance from a sacred or revealed text? Now, this is quite a Eurocentric, monotheistic idea of religion, which might work for many Jews, Christians, and Muslims, but it would disqualify many other systems, such as Buddhism, paganism, or indigenous beliefs, from being considered religion or faith. And we also know that there are tangible and practical ideas about what religion is and what it does, based on how it structures people's choices of what they wear, what we eat, how we navigate our romantic or sexual relations, how we use our money, where they're allowed to go to schools or work, and so on. There's also a very tangible aspect because religious institutions have assets, most visibly for many of them, buildings, places of worship, for example. And they will also have investments, right? So where do they do their banking as religious institutions? Which pension providers do they use for their paid staff, or which ones that they endorse for their communities, and so on? So there are these interpretive aspects and tangible aspects, which historically have been quite heavily and even violently contested within religious traditions and also between religious movements, right? But as I will argue later, these sorts of questions have also given rise to movements that have upheld radical inclusion and social justice in very meaningful ways. Now, you might think that the word climate in my organization's name is much less problematic because it seems, after all, to be much more empirically grounded. You can measure trends in temperature, rainfall, air composition, and so on. So these should be less disputed facts, right? Now, I would argue that one of the reasons we need to have webinars such as these is that even words like climate, nature, and environment are hermeneutic or interpretive concepts also, and they can be subjected to as much contestation as concepts like religion or faith. Now, I'm not denying that there are definitely empirical, objective facts about things such as extreme weather events and droughts and sea level and temperature rise and floods and so on, as described by Al-Hassan, which Sudan is facing. But the thing is, words like climate, nature, and environment also become contested at the level of how they are used to explain the nature of the world, how the world came into being, our place in the world, what kind of relationships are worth protecting, and what sort of resources we are allowed to use or that we should stop using, or which we should not allow other people to use, and so on, right? And how we distribute this usage with ourselves and with each other. So in my work, my job is to balance these interpretive and tangible aspects of religion and faith and climate and nature in all their dizzying diversity with faith groups that are trying to do this work here in the UK. And against this backdrop, if you accept that there is something called climate change, there are still many different ways to try and address it. And at Faith for the Climate, we have been focusing on climate justice as our core approach. And to do this, we are really indebted to the fantastic work of organizations such as Climate Outreach. So that report and project that Hur was talking about has been very valuable for us as well to how to translate this for our own purposes. But again, what does this mean? What does climate justice mean? Again, climate justice is an interpretive concept, right? It has its hermeneutic and tangible dimensions, and it's actually been defined quite differently by different people. So here's my own understanding of climate justice. To me, addressing climate justice requires, one, an understanding that it has social and political, climate change has social and political causes, and therefore it will need social and political solutions. And it requires a very basic acknowledgement that climate change is caused by inequality and injustice, and it causes more inequality and injustice. And it requires an understanding that climate change is not just a technical or environmental problem which can be solved only with technical or scientific fixes. So it is the failure to recognize the social, political, and economic imperatives that has turned climate change into a climate crisis. And as we've heard from Hur and Al-Hassan, it is the people who are suffering the worst impacts in the world who have actually done the least to cause climate change. And right now, they have the least amount of capacity to respond to it because of historic impoverishment from colonialism and capitalism. Now, as I said, this is how I understand climate justice, but I also work with people who might express this idea differently. So what we are all settling on now is to agree that no matter how we express or understand climate justice in its specifics, it has some core variables that we need to talk about. So there's the variable of power, so like I talked about the social and political causes of climate change, the dimension of inequality. It has to account for time. So things like historic responsibility, who it's affecting most now, who will it affect more in the future? The generations that are unborn, young people, and so on. It has to take account lived experiences. This is not just a technical problem, right? So how do people actually face climate change? How are they impacted? And finally, it requires a transformation of whole systems and not just technical fixes. So these are the four variables that I think we can sort of use as a framework to see if approaches to climate change take into account the concept of justice. Now, the causes of climate change are indisputably tangible and also technical. So we've heard about them this afternoon: deforestation, intensive industrial agriculture, fossil fuel extraction, extraction and burning, and so on. But the thing is, for these systems to have gained widespread application and to be so normalized today, they would have required interpretive and ideological justifications that turned them into very legitimate operations that we all accept, that are backed by those with social and political and economic power. Now, this process has often involved the approval or justification by religious leaders and religious institutions. So, for example, if we're talking about histories of colonial extraction and violence, we've seen the complicity of mainstream Western churches, for example, through the doctrine of discovery or the white man's burden. Or if we look at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia today, the sanctification of oil as ni'mah or a divine gift, right? This is the kind of thing that sanctifies and normalizes this sort of extractive enterprise. Also, religions have been complicit in, constructing or enabling racism, misogyny, and homophobia. There is no denying this, and this went hand in hand with the colonial expansionist enterprise as well. And in the capitalist exploitation of working classes and peasants, including in the UK, we've also seen the collusion of religious elites and secular political elites in the history of Europe, especially in the medieval era, which, has transformed and morphed. And we also see, how this results in power imbalances in human-human relations and human nature relations. But I'd like to pause here and ask, all I've described is true, but what aspects of religion are we talking about here? Now, this is where I'd like to draw upon the work of an Egyptian scholar of gender and Islam called Laila Ahmed, because she distinguishes between what she calls the establishment strand of Islam vis-a-vis the ethical voice of Islam. This is in her work where she explains the history of Muslim women's activism within Islam, seeking more justice and equality, right, from the very earliest days of Islam. Now, this argument really resonates with me, this idea of the ethical voice. I'm a Muslim, and I find it in places such as Surah Al-Mujadilah, chapter 58 of the Quran, which basically means she who disputed. Now, in summary, this is a short chapter in which a woman in an abusive marriage basically has challenged the Prophet Muhammad because she's unhappy with his kind of patriarchal non-solution to her problem. And through this chapter, in a sacred text in Islam, we learn that God actually takes the woman's side and admonishes the Prophet, who then has to apologize to the woman and offer her a more constructive solution. So it's liberating for me to see that this space for activism and social justice exists within the heart of one of the sacred texts in the world, the sacred text of Islam, the Quran. And as the director of Faith for the Climate, I believe that there are many variations of this ethical voice in many, many different traditions. And so at Faith for the Climate, we try to build and support the narrative of climate justice from faith-inspired perspectives. And we work tangibly to support climate justice by highlighting this ethical strand, this ethical voice in all the faith traditions that we work with. So we also pragmatically engage with the establishment voices, because this is just how religions are. There will be establishment figures that we need to work with. So we do work with the leadership of, for example, mainstream Christian denominations, the umbrella bodies of the minority faiths in the UK, and so on. What we do believe at bottom, like at a basic level, is that climate justice needs a moral and spiritual vision. And as faith groups, what we believe is we can provide models of collaboration across communities. We can provide models of solidarity. We can provide models of resistance. We can provide models of coping with failure and what to do when we find that we are complicit with injustice, greed, and other shortcomings, right? And we have models of how you basically deal with an apocalypse. Do you deal with it in a healthy way or an unhealthy way? Do you pull up the drawbridge and say, no, everybody out, I'm saving myself? Or do you just try and make sure that everybody is protected and you lead everybody to a better place? So at Faith for the Climate, our ethical voice as a collective became very important when we mobilized faith groups in the UK ahead of the UN climate talks in Glasgow, COP26, 2 years ago. And based on our understanding of climate justice and the UK's role as a colonial power and historic big polluter, we decided to focus on ending fossil fuels and raising the debate on loss and damage, which is basically providing funding for losses and damages caused by climate change that can no longer be avoided by ending fossil fuels or adapting our buildings, food systems, and transport systems, and so on. So one success that we saw in doing this campaign is that when we started it, no one knew what loss and damage was. I didn't know what it was. I just came into post at that time, but we educated ourselves and each other. And now it seems to be the issue that no one can stop talking about. And we finally saw a loss and damage fund. It didn't go through at COP26 in the UK, but it was established last year in COP27 in Egypt. Now, despite the success of this loss and damage fund, we are seeing increasing denial and deflection from rich governments, including the UK, and big oil and gas corporations on their responsibility to wind down the extraction and production of dirty energy and to transition into renewables in a just and fair manner that leaves no one behind. I mean, the colossal profits of the oil majors and the banks and asset managers who support them at this time when we are seeing a worsening cost of living crisis in the UK and around the world, I think this speaks for itself. So at Faith for the Climate, we have therefore continued supporting recent climate justice mobilizations, including the End Fossil Fuels campaign during Climate Action Week in September and Make Polluters Pay Action Day in September this year. And this month, Faith for the Climate is raising the visibility of connecting racial justice and climate justice through in-person film screenings and panel discussions in solidarity with Black History Month. And there will be more of these sorts of film screenings and panel discussions next month during Interfaith Week. You can find all of this on our website. And this evening, actually, if you're based at King's physically, I mean, we're doing a screening at St. John's Church in Waterloo. It's right opposite the Waterloo campus of King's College London. We're screening a documentary on the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., and we will be discussing the relevance of his work to what we need to do now to address the climate and ecological crisis. So let me just put a link to those events in the chat, and then you'll be able to find the booking link for our film screening today. Yes, so final slide, I'm ending soon. So addressing the climate crisis entails an interpretive task to redefine tangible human-human relations and also human-nature relations. And engaging with faith groups is imperative. Why? Because religion provides valuable analytical insights into how the interpretive or ideological dimensions of climate and nature and justice get constructed and deployed. Religious communities are also vital partners in the struggle to address the climate crisis in a truly just way that leaves no one behind. And at Faith for the Climate, we try to bring this moral voice, telling the story of climate impacts as a human story and one that is driven by injustice and actually worsens it. And we do this by appealing to the ethical voice in all traditions and ways of expressing this voice through interfaith actions, rituals, symbols, resources, and community gatherings. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's a really insightful perspective from yet again a different angle. So I think it really shows how climate justice, how there are so many different layers to it. And I think it also Faith for the Climate is such a powerful example of also coming together across traditional divides among also shared vision and shared goal. And I find it really inspiring about finding the ethical dimensions across various religions, providing those models of solidarity. And I think the three presentations really show how big the challenge of climate justice is, how important it is, how many layers there are, the system change that's needed to address it, and really how inequalities and injustice, as all three of you have highlighted, are the root cause of this crisis and should also be at the core of the solution. Thank you so much. And I think those are three really clear takeaways from this session. So I do encourage everyone to reflect on those and to embed that in your day-to-day and thinking, and to collectively drive that structural change indeed that we need. So big thank you to our incredible speakers. Really appreciate you taking the time to share your amazing work, and it's been really inspiring. So thank you so much, and thanks also everyone from the audience for joining. And I'm sure you've all learned a lot. And know we've run over time, but just a few opportunities that I would like to mention. As I mentioned in the chat at the start, and we'll share it all in the chat as well. But to make sure that you're registered to the Sustainability Seminar Series. We've actually have our next seminar next week, and it will focus on international environmental agreements. And we have two incredible speakers lined up there as well. So we'll put that in the chat, but do check that out. Also, the Key Sustainability and Climate module, if you're at King's, do enroll in there to learn about a range of topics, and also really focusing in on the interconnections between all different areas, also social justice, climate crisis, biodiversity. They're not separate issues, so really take an intersectional approach in that module. And there also, my colleague Rosa has put all the links in the chat. So also we have a King's Climate Action Network, a newsletter that you can subscribe to, Instagram, Twitter. So do please check this out if you're interested in staying in the loop. So I want to end with another thank you for incredible speakers, for all of you for joining today, and hope to see you soon.